Thank you for helping us share the story of Lahaina and the tragedy. Today's day 20. There are heroic stories everywhere around us. There are stories of survival, and then there are tragic stories around us everywhere of lost loved ones. The count, as you know, is about 115 right now. We're being careful about the numbers, and we're doing a full assessment, like you heard earlier from Bob and team. We are looking at things like whether or not when we went and found a lost loved one, to make sure that it wasn't more than one person. We're doing questions and asking questions like that. We're also, of course, cognizant that there are some things we won't know for a little bit of time. Right now we have people diving and looking into the water, as was shared. Most of the fatalities up to the first 80 individuals were very quickly determined because it was Front Street, and you've seen it now. We're grateful that when we delayered the multiple larger buildings, and I think that was a good question, that we didn't find large numbers of people. We were very worried about that. The number of people that are unaccounted for. This is a number that we respect the police and the FBI are going through. It had hovered around 1,200 for a time. A lot of duplications were there, dropped down to about 800, and now, you know, the official number is 388, but we know it to be more or less 100 less than that now. And again, we're careful about putting out a number before we've really checked it. We're finding that we cross-reference lists and we cross-reference people, and we're able to find a lot of individuals. So these are some of the things that we're hearing and seeing. Now, as we come through this first phase and have isolated those that we've lost, we want to share with people we know. We know you want to get back into the buildings. I'm trying to accelerate that, but I'm also respecting the process to make sure it's safe. It is, as you go into the dust and debris, a concern. As soon as we can, we're going to do multiple sections. They're breaking it down so that we can have zones, essentially. We clear one zone, then people can come in, so we don't have to wait for the whole thing. That's also important because there's a sense of closure that has to happen. We're very aware of that. There are some sensitive sites that people did have access to very quickly because we were careful about not having a rush in there. We wanted to be thoughtful about that. So there's been some talk, about going to banks and other things like that, just to be careful. I'm so proud of people that there hasn't been fighting or rioting. Very limited stories of people trying to take advantage of the circumstance. Very limited, unlike many of these tragedies. What's been done so far? Well, over 10,000 verified requests through FEMA. That means those individuals are going to get a lot of resource, whether it's through the rent subsidy that Bob pointed out. There will be some cash programs that people are registered for. It's helpful. And then, of course, the long-term build is going to be important that people are registered and checked in. I want to say this. I know that some people have a reticence about dealing with government. I want them to think, if it's possible, just as me as a family member, okay, we're trying to not have anyone be scared away. No one is going to be in any way accused of anything, disadvantaged, anything if they sign up. We just want to help people because there's going to be multiple layers of help. There's going to be the federal help. There's, of course, this incredible help from the Red Cross and a lot of resources that they're bringing to people. But if people don't sign up, can't get them checks. We also need to have people sign up because we need to know the scope of how many houses in the bridge that we build. We're not going to build anything permanent at all until the people of Lahaina tell us that, but we need to know the best we can of how many houses that we need. There are over 6,000 people now. The latest number just came in moments ago between hotels and Airbnbs. Again, Mr. Fenton, who's just fantastic with his team, they have a lot of capacity to put people into much longer rentals. I met with a lot of people that have lost everything and they're worried about what happens after 30 days. We will care for you. We will make sure that there is a way to keep you sheltered and housed, but just make sure you sign up. There's a lot of mental health care concerns that we have. We met with actually the head of HHS, the Health and Human Services folks at the federal level. It's kind of extraordinary that he came. In addition, of course, to having the president come and this congressional delegation. Republicans and Democrats and everybody, we just want them to see what went on here, what suffering occurred, so that they can help us with their continuing resolution and resources. So that's how we're approaching it. Honestly, we want to be an absolute open book. My apologies if it took a little time to get into the zone and see things. In those early days, I will share with you, for example, the temperature was extremely hot on the ground, upwards of 145 degrees. It was difficult even for the dogs to do the search and rescue, there was still dust emanating from the ground. There were still embers burning. And we knew to actually keep ourselves close to the water because we felt that probably there had been loss of life right there. So we were trying to be very careful about that. Some big picture things, and then I'll answer any questions you've got. Our expectation is it's going to take a long time. And we're also expecting that to build consensus, which the mayor will run that operation to build consensus with the community. State and federal government will be there in support for infrastructure, hospital services, and so on. That's going to take time, which means we do have to have that breathing space for those who can't go into hotels, who can't go into Airbnbs. So expect us to make some decisions on that. I have made the decision to use our FEMA experts and the Army Corps of Engineers to help us with the debris removal. We had a very good dialogue about using local people when we can, about making sure we have a major cultural presence, because that's who we are, and to make sure there are prevailing wages to the best of our ability. So there are many phases of this. Then we'll move to temporary housing, and then we'll move to permanent housing in time. So that's the scope of where we are right now. I will pause there because I know you probably have specific questions. Just know that the whole state has been reaching out to us, and then the whole nation over them has been reaching out to us. So we expect to have enough resources, but we have some pretty big battles ahead.
You mentioned multiple phases. The first phase today that we're learning that the land portion of the recovery is, for the most part,
yes,
completed. I mean, that's in itself is kind of a heavy phrase and a heavy thought to even think about.
Yeah.
Moving to another phase.
Yes.
Just your thoughts on it.
It's important. It's day 20. It's pretty incredible given the fact that it was 5.5 miles, square miles of territory. They actually accomplished in an accelerated fashion the survey. It was extraordinary to watch it go from 20 or 30 search and rescue to 100, and then big numbers. At the peak, when there were over 40 dogs and staff and personnel in there, they were really able to go very briskly through. But there were some technical challenges, and we had to move some vehicles so we could get heavier equipment in. I think it's important that people do recognize these milestones, because I want them to feel confident that we will help over time to get people back to their lives. A lot of people that we've seen here lost everything, and to know that they will soon be able to watch us begin those zones to get people in, and that's going to be refreshing. You know, the 7-day mark was significant. That's when the road opened. The 14-day mark was quite significant because that was the day that everyone got out of the shelters. The 20-day mark, very significant because, as you're hearing, essentially the search and rescue, at least on land, is done. And we will update people at the 1-month mark with all of the updates so that you can have consistent information.
It's been 20 days, so what is the likelihood of those divers finding or recovering anyone right now?
Well, that's a very good question. So there will be no survivors that we'll discover at this point. We'll only find people that were not necessary on that list, that they didn't need to be on the list of unaccounted for people. We will find possibly the remains of some individuals on the boats that were out there. There are a couple other sensitive spots that were underwater that had to be investigated, but we're not anticipating a significant increase. Really, the more sensitive part right now is making sure that we look through the genetic, profiles of what we've discovered. That's why it's so important what they're doing here. If you've lost a loved one, if you wonder, come and get a swab so that we can get some closure for you.
I just want to kind of repeat, is there a lag in the numbers then while you go through genetic profiles, or have all the numbers from the land search and recovery operation been issued and released? Yeah,
there's not really a lag at all. It's as they check and recheck for just to be completely competent and hopefully 100% accurate, we're checking to make sure that there aren't tragic commingling of people who have passed. A lot of the properties were so tragically destroyed, there was not something you could traditionally just say, okay, I think that was a person that we lost. So that's what we're checking. that happens after every disaster like this, and so we're just very careful about that. But we do not anticipate the number going much higher now.
So you were meeting with a lot of survivors out there.
Yes.
You talked about how everybody has a story. Can you tell us a story, because we weren't allowed to be out there
Sorry, yeah.
during that time, but can you tell us a story about something that you heard from them that touched you, and then also what they were asking you specifically to do for them moving forward?
Sure. So many. I'll tell a couple briskly. A couple came in, an older gentleman and his wife, and she had dementia. And he was protective of her so much that they didn't come to the shelters early, and they were, basically starving. And then when they finally arrived here, they were able to get the elderly wife care and begin to feed him, and they're recovering. Another story, we had a young woman, 18 or 19 years old, pregnant, 7 months, quite pregnant, and she couldn't pass the road back to her doctor's visit. And so we had to find ways to get her there because she could deliver that baby, given the stress, anytime. Hopefully she'll come to term another 6 or 8 weeks, but if she doesn't, we needed to get her care. She's telling us that she's changed her decision and she's going to name her child something different than she initially thought. It's now going to be named Faith, after having faith in what people did to save her. We had a gentleman who shared that he lost everything. He built an empire of a business that he employed hundreds of people, and all of the boats but 3 burned, all of them. And so he has employed so many people, and though he didn't lose any loved ones, he feels a sense of loss because he knows that many people are displaced from their livelihood. There's every story out there. We've heard a story of a young boy who, 15 years old, had not driven before, but had just gotten his driver's permit. The first driving he did that was meaningful in any way was pulling one of his young siblings into the car and the mother, and driving through fire on all sides. I mean, stories like this are amazing. There are other stories where someone went back to rescue an individual and could only get one person out and doesn't know if the others survived. Usually it's strangers. So all these stories, they are shocking. Lahaina represents about 10% of Maui's population, and it resonates to everyone. I will say this, there are other messages to share, messages that you would think callous but aren't. Like, for example, we want people to travel back to Maui and to Hawaii, not to West Maui right now because we're recovering, but to Maui in general, because many people here, now they're in shelter, will go and work somewhere and they will pay for their kids' tuition, or they will pay to begin for the down payment on a car. So we're encouraging the world to travel here to the other side for the most part of the island, even during this tragedy, because that will help them recover. There's just going to be so many things we do, and the state will step up and help Maui more than ever, but we can't have a year go by where people don't, begin to return.
Well, out there, when you were talking to survivors, what did they ask you to do specifically? Did you hear anything new from them that maybe you hadn't thought of?
Sure. Lots of things. The pharmacy people asked me to get their pharmacy building opened up sooner so they can deliver services. A lot of people have asked to get into their house. That's very common as a request, and they want to know exactly when that's going to happen. Let's see, today a lot of it was sharing just that they lost everything and they wanted to know how to sign up. Some people were still stunned enough, even though it's been shared many times, sign up with Red Cross and FEMA, they were still feeling confused about what to sign up, and that's why it's so good that everyone knows to sign up here and now so they know when they can get resources. Some people asked, will I not have a house after 30 days? And we want to be really clear that I've signed a 36-week contract, for example, just to start with Red Cross. It gets reimbursed, all these resources that come, but it's a large contract. It was a $99 million contract right off the bat to make sure that we have the commitment to people that are wondering, where am I going to be in 6 weeks, 3 months, and so on. So we want people to know that they're going to have a long runway as we build out temporary places to live, as we give them an opportunity to choose where to go. Some people asked about unemployment, whether or not they had to go look for jobs immediately. They don't. Their unemployment will be maintained irrespective of what they can or can't do. We would never expect anyone to have to do that in the short term.
Governor, how is the AG's investigation working with the ATF, the FBI, Mine Police? How are all those, the federal investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice, the fire's cause and origin? How is that working with your Attorney General's like, how are they interfacing, investigating? Yeah,
thank you for that question. So as you know, 2 days in, we authorized the Attorney General to do a comprehensive review, which we're now describing purely as an investigation for clarity. She has the capacity to talk to absolutely anyone she chooses. The Attorney General and Lopez, she came and actually was on site for, I believe, 48 hours quietly and recently, and was able to see a lot of the, the Ground Zero site. She's able to talk to whether it's HECO or the county, the fire department, police, anyone. Plus there's a third party that we contracted, so there's no bias at all. Yes?
Are they opening up though? I mean, they're suing, everyone's suing each other at this point. So I mean, how open are HECO and the county being, and can they be, frankly, with her, given the fact that, massive litigation is pending?
They are very open with me. And, everyone in a circumstance like this, they're also traumatized. And so they don't know what to say and when to say it. But they know that they will have to work with our Attorney General. The Attorney General is doing her investigation separate from what HECO or what the city and county produce as their after management assessment or even their investigations, because we feel that we have to be a neutral party. And frankly, we'll expect our work to be gone over with a fine-tooth comb too. The early sense is we've all heard different parts of the story. The fire was complex. It was in many parts of the county, but we will go over the timetable. We'll go over what could have been done. We're reviewing every policy that you can imagine under the sun. Some of it quietly, just because I want the mayors to all feel confident. As you saw, we already made a fundamental adjustment. Historically, the sirens were used, as you know, for tsunamis and hurricanes. But obviously, in this climate after this tragic fire, the siren was used just days ago because there was no way possible not to use that after the discussion that we've had. The tragedy occurred, and we're all assessing what could have been done better. In this particular case, my early assessment is the complex nature of the wind combined with fire compounded the disaster. There's little doubt that there's always human decisions that can be made better, but we have not seen that kind of circumstance very often, and we've never seen it in a town. I was at a terrible fire in Ka'u that raged all the way down mountain to the ocean, and we had no awareness or alerts whatsoever. We didn't even have any fire because we were 50 miles away at the time doing other work. This was back in about 2002. So again, we anticipate that we're going to have lots of findings that will show us where we fell down and where we rescued people. But the fire came through at 81 miles per hour at its peak. And it's a small miracle that people got out of those houses above. That was my greatest concern in these last 5 days, that we were going to find large numbers of people in those structures also.